Welcome to Writers Gambit, part one of a two-part series of readings from the Writers Radio community. I'm Carole Harmon. My fellow producer, Ingrid Rose, and I will introduce the readers. Ingrid has the posh English accent. We begin with Cathy Stonehouse, reading from her recent publication, Dream House. Cathy writes, Dream House emerged after the experience of visiting my mother in a nursing home in the UK, where I grew up, and emptying her small house in a matter of days. Surreal and associative, the book begins with an evocation of the journey to the nursing home, and, by association, from life to death. A poem about my mother and one about my grandmother then follow. Both attempt to imagine the eternal landscapes they retreated into during the liminal passageways of old age, lockdown, and institutionalization. My grandparents ran a pub, eventually went bankrupt, and were then forced to live together with their 3 young adult children in one room. My mother was an aspiring actress, and during this time won a full scholarship to drama school, although her dream of a career on the stage was never fully realized. Despite these challenges, I believe I inherited my determination, love of the arts, and powerful imagination from my mother and her mother, and this long poem is therefore an attempt to both celebrate and question my inheritance from them as daughter, granddaughter, poet, and ultimately mother to my own daughter.
Dream House. Doreen Avenue, soft rooks, ceramic dogs in the windows, the burnt dust World War II rattle of a sleep-smeared number 91 bus. One turn, another, and then another into the eerie greenness of a cul-de-sac, hanging basket, 4-digit key code, cry for help, daytime TV smell of lost worlds melting into their simplest elements. Your brief signature pressed into this perfectly bound visitor's book. Sugar, phosphates, gold rings, surnames, breath. The long rooms. In the home that is not her home, your mother has draped herself in a flowers of the Cotswolds tea towel, behind which white-boned birds rise from the cliff tops of her marriage to a psychopath. Outside, museum leaflets flutter past, Costa coffee lids, flamingos and vultures drift along silent corridors. Inside, your mother closes her blue eyes on the future. Custard congeals into yellow pellets while nurses offer ointment to smear on her lesions, the wrong sort. Inside, there are long rooms, empty, full of the shells of older women. Girls in leather sandals running for the tram, a gloved hand attached to a mask which isn't for her, but passes through her like a memory of the sun or a man dancing on a restaurant table. Inside, there are rooms overlooking High Street, where your mother has seated herself at a grimy window, ready to perform for the stalled passengers, a scene from Hay Fever, her black nylon negligee tied with a scarlet cummerbund. Someday soon, someone will recognize her potential and upgrade her cabin to one with a view of the sea, a round window through which rafts of migrants might be visible. There are no doorways into the long rooms. They echo instead with the rattle of distant theme tunes. A pair of kitchen curtains sewn into a bloodless grandmother. Delia Smith's recipe for risotto verde, hallways that connect arm to body, soul to head. In those days, the boys played tennis while I sat quietly beside Mother and Father slept beneath his horse on the southern frontier. We all ran through the emptied rooms when the adults went drinking, tried out voices until one spoke, projected me all the way into John Carpenter Street. I was everyone then. Antigone, Rosalind, Sonia, Abigail, one skirt on, one in the wash. Then the letter arrived just after I'd left. Returned to our one room to take my turn sleeping beside the closed piano. That bright voice we couldn't get rid of. Mother kept her saucepans on its lid. A recipe for trifle. In the doorway of her council house, your grandmother pins flowers to her sun hat, dons cracked white-painted shoes and a nice grey mac to wear on her walk up the hill. So very invigorating, she returns years after she leaves. A crusted milk pan empty beside ant-ridden sugar, an only twice used tea bag drying on the radiator, back door open to a waist-high forest of weeds. How close the world feels, and yet it lags so far behind. That lone boy's voice rising between stone pillars, one long last breath and then another, no pause between. Your grandmother crochets parachutes in the sitting room where two dead sons and a sister smile down from the mantelpiece. In her apron pocket, that one she wore at the cafe the day you met, a recipe for trifle. Whipping cream, glacé cherries, sliced bananas, sherry and ratafia biscuits. A small room with a narrow bed in which an angel presses ice to its forehead. A dining set rotting beneath tarpaulin, and so many whispering nettles alive in the shadows, it's as if she has turned on the radio. And Her Mother Came Too by Ivor Novello. Then a long sweep back, like a river of grain in reverse. Almost threshing time, and the men walk out in a line toward the sunset. Almost threshing time, and the women run their fingers over the stoneware, each lip of pure cold, over which cider comes.
Next up is Tarek Malik, reading from his new release, Blood of Stone, named for the earthy imprinted scent present after rainfall. Tarek was born and raised in Kotli in the Punjab, a 1,000-year-old city which was torn apart by sectarian violence which accompanied the India-Pakistan partition of 1947. Marked by the traumas of dislocation and migration, the city and its inhabitants share secrets and longings, chronicled and imagined by Malik as he gives voice to a personal history that precedes his experiences as an immigrant in Canada. As the inhabitants of Kotli are forced to branch out in search of home, their stories expand to encompass the diaspora of Malik's fellow Mohajir.
A hushed field awaits the monsoon. Slaked dew cross-hatches the moon, God's patchwork of flooding fields. Even the trilling crickets amidst settling dews resound with the bullfrogs. And how sudden is the realization that while you sat and chatted, the field has been drenched in dew, drawing your attention upwards, where arrayed anomalies beam their final gasps. How little of the light you really need in the barest wisp of October crescent to survive the dark, washing into dawn. The grass blades rustle, a cool breeze sieves the grass. I've been away too long. How long was this lying in wait, the clover snapping back into shape, the frenetic crickets silenced, slaked? How unbearable the weight of a devotee's tears. This poem is for Kashmiri American poet Aga Shahid Ali. The first part is lime green. At the mausoleum of Peer Subs, the faithful congregate at this their first annual Urs, reveling in the many splendid deeds of their benefactor, donning his eponymous lime green garments. The shroud and tomb are perched precariously between cliff edge, ravenous river. Last year's flood claimed boundary wall. This year, mere faith and tradition retain it in place. What remains? Keeping hungry waters at bay. Heading homewards at dusk, cocooned in the afterglow of adorations, blessed with fresh rounds of ganja, the pilgrims celebrate. How for them in each quotidian gesture miracles now await. How even the undersides of monsoon clouds reflect the lime green of rice paddies. The devotees weep. Second part, ochre red. A lifetime and a continent away, a poet watches an approaching dust storm, pouring volcanic ochre onto his pristine, snow-shrouded mountains and vale, musing to himself, "This is the blood of Hassan and Hussein, the soil of Karbala, gifted to us soiled here in distant Kashmir." The devotee in him weeps. The concluding poem, my father holding a butcher's knife over my crib. How many of us across the global embrace in shared simulacra of the Qurbani have woken to the sight of our fathers holding a butcher's knife over our cribs. Beta, touch this knife for blessing, a sacrifice must be made. Then the queasy returned to sleep. Underneath the new Eid costume hung spotless on the wall, while the bloodletting shielded from your view arrays glistening body parts mutely across veranda, eyes milking over dull. And you awaken to the offering of liver still quivering warm, trimmed of fat, skewered, flavored, roasted. Often dusting myself awake from a retreating carnival of youth, I return to that moment when a hand awakens me, beta. This is how a trickle of rust encounters baked brick, overwhelms the gutters. Thank you.
Chad Norman enjoys his life beside the Atlantic, in Truro, Nova Scotia, having lived a number of years beside the Pacific. He loves to read aloud, getting his poems up off the page. They appear in anthologies, literary journals, and magazines around the world. He gathers other poets and musicians together for his annual event, Riverwords, Poetry and Music Festival. His most recent book of poetry is Parental Forest, from AOS Publishing, Montreal. His immersion in the natural world reaffirms our humanity and vital interconnectedness.
Hi, it's Chad Norman. This is a reading from my new book, Parental Forest, and that's out from AOS Publishing out of Montreal, Canada. Here is a poem that I really like to read because it has a lot to do with how this book came together. It's called A Branch Over the Path. A certain morning has her tending not only spring beds, but the path going through, a property I use to find a way back to an old belief in shortcuts, a path I found based on directions another man shared, another man thought was an easier way home. Her name is Ruth, unmistakably kind, path owner of sorts, ready to leave the bulbs and soil in order to try and have me stop using the easy way to the job. I listened to her reasons, her voice, nothing more than the cold morning. Her voice never saying my choice to cut through the property she wants to take away from humans is a wrong choice, a choice I think resembles the deer's. How the does were the first to invade the forest, Ruth said is a piece of her family's privacy. No signs hang from the branch, and what would it matter? I have become a deer, and keep out wouldn't have caught my eye. Sipping a pale ale one summer for Jean Melanson in West Vancouver. I almost felt the joy found when a breeze is in the grass, under some trees now finished shading, some kind of trouble growing inside of the body I have at 60. Taken from my eyes and what they give to forget, I am aging. I am becoming a man unable to escape trust in the mystery of being, or this brief being alive. hummingbird, and shadow. 1. If it only knew, I wouldn't make a move, the return being a third visit to a swaying half-full feeder. Early sun also adds to the floor of the brown chip deck I use to learn about how the morning makes my head lift to help sight be pleasantly overwhelmed, how wings are the miracles each attempt to drink. 2. If you only knew, I wouldn't make a move close enough to hear faint chirps, like mysterious signals given to make me believe there's two of you, both here for what I hope is more than the one reason, suspended red sweetness left out to please the thirst of you and your shadow. After leaving a lousy job. Another new morning comes with another new education. I can finally agree the winter is over, as spring surrounds us. The proof once more being how a starling feeds one of her young among the impatient many, quite like the opened dandelions and the warm mothering sun.
Cornelia Hootland writes as a settler on Hornby Island in the Salish Sea, on land and ocean inhabited by the Pentlatch and Comox people. She walks over their shell middens often, reminded of a people who knew, who still know, how to live on earth and sea. At 70, she's noticing, with her newest poems, how the long connections to her beginnings, a trajectory with a philosophical bent, are more vivid. Recognizing she lives in a privileged corner of the world, and everything is holy, she hopes for perforations to let in light. She's listening.
Appointment with my surgeon. B.P. Nicol in saffron robe facing east from the prow of the canoe, 5 a.m., his voice bouncing off the ridge across Tujak Lake to the 3,000 people hillside wrapped in blankets, impatient children and thermoses of honeyed and hot. This was R. Murray Schafer's The Princess of the Stars at Banff, Alberta in 1985. The mist lifts a chorus, a simultaneous look. Baton drops, opera begins. Actors in oversized bird costumes open their wings. BP in a war canoe across the lake, but his voice, "Wolf," my son shouts, "Princess," my daughters, as towering puppets slide over the water. The instruments in the orchestra, the area echoing the hills behind and before us. B.P. Nicol, a crow on stilts. The address of the surgeon I saw yesterday, 302 Beaufort, was confusing as his entrance was at ground level. The building was cantilevered where it fell away to the ocean. The children slept in the back of the blue pickup we drove in those days, leaving the house at 3 a.m. to get to Two Jack before dawn. We apprentices of the hillside miracle, not of loaves and fishes, but of morning. Would the children believe? I didn't mention that the surgeon's walls on those 2 extra floors was covered with art so beautiful I could hardly focus on his questions. But it began with me filling up notebooks with the then and then, the always more of composition, in a bagel cafe in Calgary. And the day I watched B.P. Nichol, in monk's robes and long blonde hair, step out of a 17th Avenue bookstore, looking like Jesus. Body on the Page for Betsy Warland. Do you recognize this? Betsy holds up a blank page between thumb and forefinger of each hand. From where I sit in the audience, I see a blank page and think, terrifying. Homeland, Betsy says. This is homeland. Which makes me press my palms to the 8.5 by 11 opening into which my tense shoulders drop. Narrow study window. The woman who, her doctor says, will be dead within the year picks a flower I think is iris, yellow in any case. The doctor tells her to put her affairs in order. As if death meant a neat desk, stacks of separated papers, bills into categories stamped paid. The woman lifts the yellow bloom to her nose as she walks to the wooden gate. She can't figure out how to open, and then does. Slips through, latches it closed behind her, and walks beyond my narrowness. Little bird. My daughter, my 6-year-old, my tiny human, did not go to bed as the babysitter instructed, but waited at the front door until I came home with a man, not her father. She showed me a rash like a message on her thigh. Autobiography. I was born and my father indentured to the farmer, no telephone, bicycled the dusty Sumas Prairie to the hospital to meet me, his newborn, only after the hay, it might rain, was in. Swaddled in pink in my bassinet, I remember waiting. Something to do with the parched smell of July, the valley, long light, heat bending the hay. Sonnet with balloons. I wake thinking, that was you, my brother in summer, loose afternoons with friends, me in a bathing suit under the shorts I'm tearing off to jump into the ocean, swim alongside the boat you unmoor. The salt spray is you, life jacket alive. I've dreamt you before, wind through a doorway, hovering in a ghostly, don't touch me, I'm dead now, way. All my life, I've been the daughter of immigrants from the Netherlands. My first tongue tethers my thought. On your funeral video, I float above my grieving family. I've detached from so many words, ones I do remember, like hail, veil, very much, are the fit-to-bursting balloons of my child self, casting for words for what's pent up inside. I'd very much like to go to Girl Guides, ride my bicycle with friends despite it being Sunday, the Lord's Day, that squeezed to the wall, overinflated balloon of an upbringing. You left home, found your way to the ocean. Your holiness grew like a misspelled word can be poetry. I know you can't speak. William, braille my palm with your names for things. We were taught there's a heaven above, but not how on earth to live in between.
Thank you for joining us for Part 1 of Writers Gambit, our two-part series of readings from recent work by authors in our Writers Radio community. You have been listening to Cathy Stonehouse, reading from her long poem, Dream House. Tarek Malik, reading from Blood of Stone. Chad Norman, reading from Parental Forest. And Cornelia Hoodland, reading recent work in progress. My gratitude to these writers for sharing their work with all of us. Also thanks to my co-producers Ingrid Rose, who introduced Chad Norman and Cornelia Hoodland, and Gary Sill, who melded it into a whole with his music. This program simultaneously becomes a podcast on our Writers Radio website, or wherever you get your podcasts within 2 or 3 days. All books mentioned in this series may be ordered through your favorite bookstore or online.
You have been listening to Writers Radio, a non-commercial collaborative project which presents talented writers reading their own work. These stories, essays, and conversations revisit the long tradition of oral storytelling that connects us to the inspiration behind the words. Be sure to check the website, writersradio.ca, to subscribe to our free notifications list. It's also a way of letting the writers know you are there and appreciating their creative work.
Writers Radio broadcasts from Half Moon Bay on the Sunshine Coast in Canada, traditional tribal land of the Sechelt Nation of the Coast Salish peoples. We express our gratitude for their wisdom teachings and land stewardship.